In the tranquil garden of the Willows Hospice, where the scent of blooming lavender and the gentle rustle of leaves brought a sense of peace, 87-year-old Evelyn Clark lay in a wheelchair, her eyes closed, and her mind wandering through the corridors of time. The hospice, known for its serene environment and compassionate care, was Evelyn's home now, a place where the passage of days was marked by the soft hum of conversation and the occasional laughter of a visiting child. But today, the garden was different. There was a stir of anticipation, a hush that seemed to whisper of something special about to unfold. Evelyn had always been a woman of grace and determination, qualities that shone through even in her current fragile state. Her life had been a tapestry woven with threads of joy, hardship, and above all, a deep love for horses. Her most cherished companion had been a majestic chestnut show horse named Rusty, a partner who had shared her victories and defeats, her triumphs and heartbreaks. They had been inseparable, their bond forged through countless hours in the saddle and in the stable, a connection so profound that it felt almost spiritual. But life had taken its toll, and as Evelyn's health began to decline, she had to let go of Rusty. The horse had been given to a trusted friend, a former stable hand who promised to care for him as if he were still part of the family. For years, Evelyn had visited Rusty, but as her strength waned, the visits became fewer and finally ceased altogether. Now bedridden and often lost in the fog of her mind, Evelyn's thoughts often returned to the barn, the warm smell of hay, and the gentle snort of her beloved Rusty. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun cast a golden glow over the garden, Dr. Margaret Hayes, the head of the hospice care team, sat by Evelyn's bedside. Margaret had a reputation for going above and beyond for her patients, and she had been drawn to Evelyn's story. The woman's eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of life, a hint of the fire that had driven her through the years. "Evelyn," Margaret began, her voice soft and soothing, "I've been thinking about something that might bring you some joy. You've told me so much about Rusty, and how much he meant to you. Would you like to see him one last time?" Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they seemed to shine with a brightness Margaret hadn't seen in weeks. "Rusty?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "Is it possible?" Margaret nodded. "We're going to try, Evelyn. It might take a little time, but I promise we'll do our best." Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached out and squeezed Margaret's. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see him again." The hospice staff sprang into action, driven by the desire to grant Evelyn's wish. Margaret called the friend who now cared for Rusty, explaining the situation and the importance of this reunion. The friend, understanding the depth of Evelyn and Rusty's bond, agreed without hesitation. The next few days were a blur of logistics, but the staff were determined to make it perfect. On the day of the reunion, the garden was prepared with care. A lush green pasture was cordoned off, filled with fresh hay and a small trough of water. A bench was placed under a tree, and the staff ensured that the garden was as peaceful and inviting as possible. Evelyn, dressed in a soft blue dress, was wheeled to the bench, her face illuminated by the morning light. She looked around, her eyes scanning the garden, searching for a glimpse of the familiar chestnut coat. Margaret stood beside her, a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He'll be here soon, Evelyn. Just a few more minutes." As they waited, Evelyn's mind drifted back to the early days. She remembered the day Rusty came into her life, a young and spirited colt who had captured her heart with his fiery demeanor. She had trained him tirelessly, and together they had won ribbons and accolades, but more importantly, they had formed a bond that transcended the competitive world of show jumping. Rusty had always been more than just a horse. He was her confidant, her friend, and her protector. The sound of hooves on the grass broke Evelyn's reverie. Her head turned, and her breath caught in her throat. There, walking toward her, was Rusty. His chestnut coat was still as gleaming as she remembered, and his eyes held a depth of intelligence and emotion. He was older now, his steps slower, but the grace and dignity of his youth remained. Rusty approached the bench, his head held high. As he came closer, he paused, his ears pricking forward. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached out, and Rusty nuzzled her palm, his breath warm and comforting. For a moment, the world stood still. The staff, who had been watching from a distance, felt their own eyes well up with tears. The connection between horse and human was palpable, a reunion of souls that had been separated by time, but never by heart. Evelyn's voice, though weak, was filled with a love that seemed to defy the years. "Rusty, my old friend," she said, her hand stroking his muzzle. "I've missed you so much." Rusty whinnied softly, a sound that seemed to echo through the garden, carrying with it a world of unspoken sentiments. He lowered his head, resting it gently on Evelyn's lap, and she wrapped her arms around him, her eyes closed in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. The staff, standing nearby, felt a collective sense of wonder and privilege, as if they were witnessing something sacred. Margaret wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart swelling with emotion. "This is what it's all about," she whispered to herself, "making these moments possible even in the face of such sadness." The reunion lasted for hours, as if time itself had slowed to allow Evelyn and Rusty to reconnect. They talked, though only one spoke in words, and the other in the language of hearts. Evelyn told him stories of the past, of the championships they had won and the long, lazy afternoons in the pasture. Rusty listened, his head sometimes resting on her lap, sometimes lifting to meet her gaze, his eyes conveying a depth of understanding that was both humbling and beautiful. As the afternoon waned, Rusty stood by Evelyn's side, his presence a source of strength and comfort. Evelyn, her energy fading, leaned back in her chair, her hand still resting on Rusty's neck. The horse, sensing her need, nuzzled her cheek, a gesture of affection that brought a smile to Evelyn's face. Margaret, seeing that Evelyn was becoming tired, gently suggested that they conclude the visit. "Evelyn, it's time for Rusty to go back to his home," she said softly. "But he'll be back. We'll make sure of it." Evelyn nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, her voice a whisper. "Thank you for everything." Rusty, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, gave a final gentle nuzzle before turning to leave. The staff led him away, their own eyes brimming with tears. Evelyn watched him go, her hands still reaching out, as if to hold on to the memory for just a little longer. In the days that followed, Evelyn's health continued to decline, but the light in her eyes remained. She spoke of Rusty often, her voice filled with a warmth that touched everyone who heard it. The staff, inspired by her story, began to reach out to other patients, asking if there were any special wishes they had, any last connections they wanted to make before they passed. Evelyn's condition worsened, and the hospice staff prepared for the inevitable, but they also prepared for one more visit from Rusty. They knew how much it meant to her, and they were determined to give her as many moments of joy as possible. On a cool, clear day, Rusty was brought back to the garden. This time, Evelyn was too weak to sit by the bench, so the staff arranged for a bed to be brought outside. She lay there, her eyes fixed on the sky, as Rusty approached. He sniffed the air, his ears perked, and then he saw her. With a soft whinny, he trotted to her side, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he knew the importance of this final visit. Evelyn's hand reached out, and Rusty leaned in, his head resting on the edge of the bed. She stroked his mane, her fingers trembling, and whispered, "You've always been my best friend, Rusty. I'll miss you, but I know we'll meet again." Rusty, as if understanding, nuzzled her hand, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that defied explanation. The staff standing in the background felt a sense of closure, a bittersweet acknowledgement that sometimes the most important moments are the ones that come at the end of a long journey. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the garden, Evelyn's breathing slowed, and her hand fell limply to her side. Rusty, sensing that something was changing, whinnied softly, his head still resting on the bed. The staff, tears streaming down their faces, gently lifted him away. They knew that Evelyn had found peace, and that Rusty, in his own way, had been with her until the very end. In the days that followed, the garden at Willow's Hospice became a place of reflection and healing. Patients and staff alike spoke of Evelyn and Rusty, their story a testament to the power of love and the importance of connection. The staff continued to arrange special moments for their patients, inspired by the grace and dignity with which Evelyn had faced her final days. Rusty, now back in his pasture, continued to live a life of comfort and care, a living memory of the woman who had loved him so deeply. And in the garden, where the lavender still bloomed and the birds still sang, the legacy of Evelyn and Rusty lived on, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit and the bonds we form can bring light and hope. The story of the 87-year-old woman and her horse spread beyond the walls of the hospice, touching the hearts of many who had never met them. It became a symbol of love, a testament to the enduring connections that define our lives. And for those who had the privilege of witnessing their reunion, it was a reminder that sometimes the most profound moments are the ones we least expect, and that the journey of life, though often difficult, is made beautiful by the love we share.